So today we're here with Melnic, who's the head of consumer insights for outdoor sports at Adidas. Great to have you with us.
Hi, Paul. Great to finally connect.
Absolutely.
And I'm honored for the invitation.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to having a really great conversation. Just to start with, tell us a bit about yourself, your professional background, and your journey to your current role.
Sure. I've been mostly involved in digital businesses until I joined Adidas, looking after online marketing, digital growth, product development, and later on strategy, so digital strategy overall. And I was always passionate about optimizing things, so doing things better. And that's where, when I had the opportunity to join Adidas in a purely data analytics role, that's what I did. And I had the opportunity to develop tools, innovative tools, which did not exist before, were custom, but so that's kind of a little bit my approach to how I do things. When there's nothing out of the box, I make it.
And what made you really connect with data analytics on an emotional level? You've got a pretty strong background in digital and analytics, but what really, what is it for you that makes you want to do it every day?
Seeing opportunities and seeing where, when things go well, where they could go extremely well, and always asking the why questions, always having the answers to the whys, and trying to understanding the world and having clear answers as to why things are happening. And last but not least, being able to predict the future. Of course, it's not always a crystal ball. It's always about scenarios, modeling, but it's surprising how much more accurate you can do that once you know the data.
And obviously here at the Data Storytellers, we kind of talk a lot about how do we get people on board and how do we make projects successful. You mentioned that it's about asking the right questions. What do you think are some of the best questions to ask? Whether it's from a project-based approach or maybe getting leadership on board or getting team members on board with analytics. What are some of those right questions in your opinion?
I would start with, do we have the right vision? Do we have a shared vision? And do we have are we on the path to achieving those? And then are there any compromises to make, or can we do the things we want with a lot of creativity, and do we have a lot of freedom to do things differently? So I would start from the vision, the path, and the methodology.
And from an industry perspective, how do you see the state of data analytics today? The general progress of data-driven business transformation in the corporate world. There's a lot of buzzwords being thrown around, a lot of industry jargon, and that's been going on for the last, more than 10 years or so. So where do you see that right now?
We are still in a data wonderland, or in a data wonderment phase. People are enthralled by data. People love to look at dashboards and being able to look at the numbers in real time or look at some trends prediction. So there's a lot of data wonderment still, instead of being much more punctual and using maybe only 20% of your time for data and the rest on modeling, on scenario making, on solutions and recommendations. There is a fair degree of education still needed to drive data literacy and analytics literacy across a much wider range of stakeholders, because what I notice also is that there's maybe a bit of data fatigue and analytics fatigue happening. People no longer want to hear what the story behind the data is. They just want opinions. They want voices in the room. They want real verbatims, perhaps. They want to have more tangible, a more tangible subject. But that's where a good storyteller will make all the difference.
Yeah, so on the one end of the spectrum, you've got the data wow, and on the other end, you've got the data fatigue. So it's probably really hard to reconcile that, and keep the attention, but also make sure people don't get sick of the message.
Yeah.
With that in mind, what do you think is data drivenness? How would you define an organization being data driven?
It's almost like in the easiest parallel or metaphor I would do is when a person is rational. When a person is emotional, they're not driven by data, and an organization is driven by perhaps politics or certain interests, and they don't look at the data. With data, you become more rational, more grounded in a way, and that's how I would put it.
Mm. And where do you see the biggest opportunities for ambitious companies and leaders today within DNA?
Automating more of the data, where the data intake is comes into play. Where it makes sense to use the data and have that infrastructure, have those processes in place, have the right KPIs looked at and considered, but also the data is the beauty of it is, of course, not just in looking at dashboards, it's looking at interpretations and recommendations. We still have far too few analysts, truly creative analysts, visionary analysts throughout organizations, and giving the processes don't always take them into account. More processes, more data-centric processes also means you're more connected to real-time data flows, real-time information flows, not to mention, of course, consumer centricity for consumer-facing businesses. It's all for the better.
Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting point to bring up, because it kind of makes me want to ask, what do you see your role as? Are you the storyteller? Are you the evangelist? Are you the recruiter? Are you all of these things and more? How would you define your role?
Evangelist, absolutely. However, I try to be an evangelist and not a preacher. It's important to see what to be in tune with your stakeholders and understand what their challenges are, how and always translate data usage to their benefits. It's also about an advocate for data tools and for analytics. There is a lack of trust in data, and there is a lack of transparency from some of the sources, or there's always issues, so to say. And yet I find myself often in this position of defending that if you have a 3% error or something that's not quite right, it doesn't mean you don't have to trust the rest 97%. So this the advocacy role, absolutely, and it's I absolutely love it when you see data enthusiasts who then learn to be hands-on, and empowering these people is perhaps some of the most impactful thing that I managed to do over the past few years.
And a good couple of questions have come up for me there. Do you find that you tend to spend more time defending that 3% or advocating that 97%? Where do you find the biggest struggle?
I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by people with whom I have to speak for the 97%. There are, and I always know the people who will challenge me, but they do that, and not just to me. It's like their role in the business, their role in the team dynamic, to be the critical thinker and to always bring a new perspective to the table. And it's not defending the 3%. It's about constant growth and about always finding, having your eyes open and knowing, having a full picture that's realistic. Sometimes these challenges or defending the 3% means like you need to upgrade your toolkit. You need to review some of the ways of working. And it's that constant challenge to keep on growing and developing.
And the other thing I wanted to touch on is that you mentioned empowerment. And this is a very key skill. What do you think are some of the other qualities that leaders need? You know, the ones who actually inspire real change and those who are successful at driving these kind of transformations?
Curiosity and inquisitiveness. People have to ask questions, and people want to, when people want to find out by themselves how it is to create a scenario, how it is to set targets and objectives, and make them both realistic but also ambitious. That's when you realize that's great, but you also have to be to have more than that ambition. You have to be also curious and inquisitive.
Do you think humility is a big part of that too?
Humility is great, but it can serve some. It depends on which side of the circle we're touching upon. And if we have different, let's say we have different stakeholders across the circle, humility is useful, but you also have, it's more important to speak up and to take a stand than to be humble and modest. Perhaps it's a cultural thing, but I noticed that humility hasn't helped many, and it's also taken perhaps as a traditionally not such a as a negative trait.
That's interesting.
Perhaps, yeah, it's I think this is there is a cultural shift happening, and when the humble one will be defended, or the humble intervention would also have more backers in the room, it will be easier to behave like that. However, for now, it's still I still see a fair degree of ambitiousness and standing strong on your feet. Maybe what's the right word? This conqueror mentality still yielding better results than the humble.
And just feeding into that wider discussion, a lot of what we talk about here at the Data Storytellers are the soft skills. So what do you think are some of the most important soft skills? You know, we talk about things like communications, influence, persuasion. What other, and in your opinion, out of those, what do you think are the most important in terms of actually building those relationships that get the results going?
I would say that having this analytical mind is extremely important, and not just being able to run the analysis and create all sorts of the conclusions, dashboards. It's knowing what's important, and to different stakeholders, in different contexts, different things from the same, let's say, data set from the same sources will become important. So knowing what to say to whom and at what time, at what timing, this type of analytical thinking is very important. Knowing what's important and how and when to say it. Aside from that, if we come back to this topic of humility, it's the ability to translate the data to everyone's understanding. Sometimes use of jargon in the right context is good. Sometimes you have to not dumb it down, but explain things in the context that's relevant, that surrounds you.
Really strict in a way.
Sometimes, but with the most difficult, the most complex thing is to create simplicity. So ultimately, it takes skill to get there.
And you mentioned having this analytical mindset. Can you tell us about a time that this played into your success during your career, whether it was something like securing executive sponsorship or changing the behavior of some key stakeholders, or spreading data literacy throughout the organization, something like that?
I can think of a couple of examples, and it's almost as if you are, you can, when you step into some of those conversations, you step in with two hats. On one side, you're there as the analyst, as the expert, as the mirror or the translator of the data. But at the same time, you're not just a translator, you're a paraphraser, and you help senior stakeholders or executives validate certain findings with you, and then focus on what's the most important, because they can take everything into account and come out with unclarity or come out with a lack of direction. And yet together you can step out of that analytical and just, let's say, truth-speaking mode and become a bit more selective in the terms what you say and the things that you keep quiet, because all of the things are true. And in any situation, there are many truths. However, for specific business scenarios, it's important to focus on the top, some key points, and having that discernment to know on what to focus on and what to leave out. It's almost like it's a decision-making power with that you can have, that one must have on themselves.
And this is again something that I'm really keen on touching on, is this single version of the truth that everybody talks about. It's kind of like almost in itself, it's another buzzword. When do you find is the best time to really spearhead the single version of the truth? And when do you find it's best to accept that there are multiple truths? To say, I don't know, a project, if we think about it from this project approach as opposed to like anything else.
The single version of truth is useful when the results are taking you in the direction, it helps with inertia, helps with your momentum. Then you can, it becomes almost fuel to the engine that you have running. So in that case, when things are successful or are very unsuccessful, then you can use that single version of truth that indeed that's the way forward. For situations when there could be multiple outcomes, that's when you need to keep that flexibility and critical thinking more active than just that focus on the, let's say, on what the data is telling you, because sometimes the data is sometimes not all the answers could be found in the data you're looking at. Or
that's really interesting, and I think a big element of a lot of what we've mentioned today is trust. What do you think about the importance of trust and building trust, and also some of the best ways to really build and facilitate that in an organization?
There are a lot of elements to trust. They come from your, for instance, from the methodology, the process, the people involved, the expertise those people master, but also the sources that you're using, how they're built, and the trust that people can also use their own judgment to interpret what you're telling them. So this the trust is mutual. When you don't trust an audience, that's there is the audience doesn't trust you, you might as well skip that meeting, or might find a better use of your time. Without trust, let's say trust starts from the fact that we're all heading in the same direction. We have shared goals, shared visions, shared values even, and without trust it would be impossible. And then of course you can challenge that by there's that saying like common sense is not that common, or without trust like everything crumbles. But in the end, sometimes it's almost healthy not to have 100% trust, but it's not trust per se, it's more as a facet of critical thinking and keep asking questions.
So what are the best questions to ask then when you want to build trust with someone, or maybe like a group of people?
It depends on the context or the problem at hand. If I would always start from how can I help? In the end, it's about helping them do things better, or helping the business achieve certain results, or helping someone do things faster, or helping come up with new concepts, new ideas. I would start with that. Secondly is where do we see opportunities, and is there any way I can contribute to building up certain opportunities? And for last but not least, it's about optimizing, because there's absolutely that that world of limited resources. You cannot do everything, and increasingly less is more, and focusing on the right less is important. And this is where I increasingly kind of contribute to.
Yeah, and again, I think something we can talk about is the actual allocation of resources. So how do you set those clear priorities, build those plans, and prioritize and execute how do you decide what is more of a priority? Do you look at that from a business perspective? Do you see what the individual group needs, or what project might take precedence? How do you go about doing that?
I would a lot starts with how much time on our hands do we have, and if you start with the end goal in mind, you start to reverse engineer and try to figure out what would it take to have ideal results, and that's where prioritization comes from. Maybe if I look a while back, it took I used to spend too much time with data and modeling, and really trying to come up with answers or ways of asking the right questions. And now it's more increasingly about starting with almost the answer in mind and the end goal in mind, and then using the data as a tool, and using other elements of not just data, other parts of analysis toolkits I've become perhaps more disconnected, let's say emotionally disconnected from the data per se, because the more entrenched you are with the data, the less time you have to apply that perspective thinking and work with your stakeholders to understand where they are coming from and what their needs are.
And again, just touching on the resources piece, from your perspective, What do you think are some of the key challenges for data transformation leaders today?
Analysis paralysis. It's like you can spend immeasurable time crunching the data and working with data, modeling it. In the end, it's only what powers your systems. It's only the fuel in the systems, but it's all about more the system and the output. So I would encourage anyone, and especially practitioners, to focus more on the bigger picture, to focus more on the results and on delivery, and perhaps even more on education rather than data perfection. Or analysis perfection. Yeah.
Absolutely. Without giving too much away, what important projects are you currently working on at the moment in terms of leveraging data throughout the business?
It's almost as if every project uses data to a certain degree, and we are in 2022 planning still, trying to refine some of and what you just talked about earlier, prioritization, and making sure that we're spending and we're allocating the right resources to the best shots. And also what I'm trying to push for more is this kind of 2030 scenario planning, so that we don't look so much at 2023 or 22-23 or 4 to 5 years time horizon. I want us to look much further away and then work back to make sure that the goals that we've set will be valid, will be proud of, and how do we get there? And also when it comes to, for instance, let's say our data landscape or our analytics landscape, where do we want to be in 2030? And what would it take us to get there? I would, an example that I kind of experienced or kind of observed was a drive for automation and a drive for using tools which are almost like black boxes. And increasingly, I see there's a trend that more and more people want to work hands-on with data. Oh, yes, perhaps that might be inefficient. Yes, perhaps that might not yield the right results. But how do we transition from this phase into something that's more where there's more flow and there's more time? The brain power is allocated not on crunching the numbers, but on looking at what can be done with that.
Absolutely. It sounds like you've got some really exciting stuff going on there. What are your personal recommendations and advice to data analytics leaders?
That's a great question, and I would encourage everyone to focus on relationships and to make sure that they their vision, their value is their value add is understood by their senior stakeholders. Often it takes much longer than 6 months or even 18 months to prove the value of an investment in analytics. And it's only with that shared vision and the appreciation of what the change driven by could be, that you would be able to become successful at rolling out or making change happen. Secondly, it's to stay curious and to stay always connected to what is happening in the industry, and not be afraid to try new things. There's incredible momentum and incredible development happening on whether done by startups, whether done by also some of the biggest companies. So this challenge of constant learning and constant widening of constant horizon widening, don't hesitate and don't become hesitant when it comes to adopting new tools, new practices. And last but not least, I would say remember that the bigger vision, having that perspective thinking and keeping that perhaps more often than not engaged.
Well, Annie, that's everything from me. I think there was some fantastic insights there that I know that the community will be excited to hear about and hear your perspective as well. Thanks so much for coming on the show. And yeah, I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. And thank you for the challenging questions and the great discussion.